God is infinite, we are finite, so how can there be a chibur between the two? How can God communicate to man, etc.? The Arizal introduced the idea of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means a restriction. For example, a light bulb that shines everywhere and you turn it into a laser, it doesn't go everywhere, it goes in a specific area, so you restrict where the light is going. Or if you have, you're teaching mathematics to a 5-year-old, even though you may know more mathematics than he does, you need to restrict how you are communicating with him, otherwise you won't understand anything. If you start going into cosines or other such amazingly advanced mathematics like division, he may not understand what you're talking about, so you need to mitzamtzem the information, mitzamtzem your abilities and give them to him in a level that's much below yours. So since the Arizal had said that, there is a maklokas, basically 4 ways in how to understand this tzimtzum. The simple way of understanding this is if tzimtzum is pshuto or tzimtzum lav pshuto. Tzimtzum pshuto means that just like it says it's restricted, that's what it means. It's restricted. That the Arizal was actually referring to, that God has restricted himself. So therefore, in this world, you're not going to be able to find God's atzmus, his the full power of God. It's just a restriction of God. And tzimtzum lav pshuto means that it doesn't really mean that he is actually restricted. It's just a perception, our perception of the world. Since we have finite brains, therefore it's our perception of the world is that God is restricted, but really God is fully here. It's just we don't perceive God in that way, but we can access him when we do access God, we're actually accessing, or we can access him in his full existence. Now, simply, this can also get more complicated, as there is what's called the ma'or and the or. The mashal would be the sun and the rays of the sun. The ma'or being God himself, and the or being the hashba, the way that God relates to people, his outgrowth, like a ray, the way that he interacts with people. I'm missing the words, but if I say the same words over and over again, maybe it'll be easier. So the first shita is that there is tzimtzum pshuto in the or and in the ma'or, meaning that God himself, when you say God is everywhere, it means he's not really, and really he's nowhere, because he's mitzamtzem himself into the existence, so therefore God isn't actually here. It's not just a perception, he's actually not here. He's not here himself, and the way that he interacts with the world is also, you can never actually interact with God himself. You're only acting in a echo, let's say. So, or in his shlichim. Maybe a good example would be Malachim go into Mitzrayim. It's just the shaliach. It's not him himself. So this the ikar reason behind this is because you have, for example, a toilet where you can't say Kriya Shema. You can't have your Hurim Kedusha. So you have these places that are disgusting. God's not going to be there. You can't have God himself actually there. So he restricts himself. And he's not there. The second shita is that the ma'or is lav kapshuto. But the or is kapshuto. That God himself is everywhere, but the way that he interacts with the world, so that is restricted, mamish. So it also could be that, like on a subconscious level, you can actually interact with God Himself, but on a conscious level, He's not there. You're only interacting with a restriction of Him. Then the third level is that there's a tzimtzum lav k'pshuto both in the ma'or and the or. So, meaning that God Himself is restricted. However, it's lav k'pshuto. So it's the second Shita holds that God's not tzimtzum b'klal. But here we're saying no, He is tzimtzum, but it's but that tzimtzum is lav k'pshuto, so that the access is perceived. Even in the ma'or, there's a perceived restriction, and also in the or is a restriction, but it's only perceived. And then the fourth level is that God Himself is not mitzamtzam b'klal, and He's only mitzamtzam in the or, which is the fourth level. So that would mean that when the Arizal was referring to God's restriction, again to answer the question, how can we interact with God? It's that really God's everywhere, and there's no tzimtzum in God Himself anywhere. However, the way that we perceive God, there's a tzimtzum in that, and therefore we see the world in a certain way, which is actually restricted. But there isn't actually any restriction in it. So to go back to my mashal with teaching mathematics to the kids, is that when you tell him 1 + 1 = 2, you aren't hiding anything from him. You're just holding back, because if you gave him everything, he wouldn't actually get anything. So, for example, you have a mashal when you're trying to explain something. You have a mashal. Animal farm, a great mashal for Soviet Russia and socialist America, as is coming in 2020. It used to be people had to read Animal Farm when they were a kid, but now they don't. So that's why there's all these left-wing socialists everywhere. Now, if you give a history book to kids, the kids can read Animal Farm, and it's just a story about pigs and horses and farms. Wonderful. But if you give them a history book about Russia, they're not going to understand anything. However, now that they have the mashal of the Animal Farm, then therefore they can actually access the nimshal, and nothing is actually being withheld from them. It's just given to them in a way that they can understand, because they're just not going to engage in toll with the history of communist Russia. So because of the restriction of the child himself, therefore you're actually giving him everything, but only in a way that he can understand it, and therefore as he gets older, as he develops, therefore he can actually bring the mashal into the nimshal, and therefore he's actually lacking nothing. So, in short, the Vilna Gaon holds of the first Shita. The first Shita being that there's tzimtzum everywhere. If there's tzimtzum everywhere, pshuto. So therefore, if you ever want to experience God, you really have to get away from this world. And every part of this world, the deeper that you go into the Gashmis, the less godly it is here. So therefore, you really need to escape. You need to escape the Gashmias and run into the Ruchnias. Because the Gashmis is just you'll never find anything in there, because it's just a hester of God, and it's just a restriction of God, and the only way that you'll ever get God is to basically die and get out of this world. So if that's all true, so therefore everything is ossur, and you really need to don't eat, don't do anything physical. Anything Gashmis really is a sin, and the less you're involved in Gashmis you are, so therefore the holier you are, and therefore you'll die soon, hopefully, and then you can get out of this place. That really creates a very biddy-avid world, but in this world, so therefore for sure smartphones are ossur. I mean, that's not a shaila, because everything is. Everything physical is just taking you further and further into the nonsense of this world, because this world was created as a nonsense, God's not here, and therefore to stay away from everything. So everything has to be ossur. That's the Shita of the Vilna Gaon. So if you'll see, obviously, a lot of Litvak communities follow that Shita. Now the Chaim Volozhin, who was a Talmud of the Gro, actually says version 3, where there's a tzimtzum lav pshuto, but it's also in the Maor. And the Rebbe, the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, says, which I think is really quite amazing to say, if you understand the wars between the Misnagdim and the Hasidim. The Rebbe said that the reason that Rav Chaim Volozhin changed from the opinion of the Vilna Gaon is because he was influenced from reading the Tanya. The Rav Chaim Volozhin was reading the Tanya, and he changed his opinion, but I have no proof for that, says the Rebbe in a letter. So he went to point 3, and the Tanya actually holds a point 4, which is that there's no tzimtzum in God, and there is only a tzimtzum in a perceived tzimtzum in the or, which again we'll see. So all that really means is that the world is a mashal in order that you'll reach, that God had needed to mitzamtzim himself in order to that you would be able to, well, we would be able to understand anything. Because if there's no tzimtzum of God, so therefore everything's echod. If everything's echod, so you don't exist. If you don't exist, so therefore you can't have a relationship with God. So therefore there has to be the perceived tzimtzum in order to have a separation from God, in order to have a relationship with Him. But that's all a marshal. But you're not actually lacking anything. That God has just mitzamtzim into the marshal. That this world is a marshal for Elokus, for Elokus mamish. Where that's true, therefore the more that you understand the marshal, the more you actually grasp Elokus, and all you're trying to do is understand the marshal better, going from the marshal to the nimshal. And all the world is a marshal. Since all the world is a marshal, it's for your benefit, in order that you'll be able to understand what's going on at the end. So therefore the more you get into the marshal, therefore the more you'll actually find Elokus, and therefore this world is not somewhere to run away from, but it's actually somewhere to involve in. Now again, if you stay in the marshal, you're not going to learn anything. If animal farm, it's just a nice story about pigs and horses, you're really missing the boat there. So if you have the internet and use it for pornography or whatever it is, so then you are missing the boat. So that's not really what it's for. However, if you have a smart, there is nothing ossur with anything. Like, for example, a alcoholic who does kiddush on wine is an avera. So too, anything can be used the wrong way. But it doesn't mean that anything is ossur. It means you need to use things the correct way. It basically means don't get lost in the mashal. Don't just get stuck in the idea of I enjoy this, therefore I will just keep on getting pleasure out of this. The enjoyment of that is to bring you to the enjoyment of God, etc., etc., which I think we've spoken about before. So the reason why a lot of the posters that go up, so I don't know if they're really going up in LA and that part of the world, but posters in Jerusalem saying, "Oh, this is ossur, and it is ossur." It's all coming from tzimtzum pshuto, like the Gro, not like Rav Chaim Volozhin, and for sure not like Hasidim or Chabad, which is again Rav Chaim is level 3 and Chabad is level 4. But that's where they're coming. That's why. But it's a Shita. It's just it's an opinion. It's machlokas as to whether these things are true, and what is the world in the end? Do you run away from the world because there's no elokus here, and therefore you're stuck, and the best thing to do is really die as quick as possible and get out of here? And this world is just a place to rack up rack up points, so then when you get over there, you'll have more Disney dollars. That's Shita 1 or Shita 4 is that no, this is place is actually fine and looks everywhere, and this is actually the great place. You have this machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban, where the Rambam holds that your guf doesn't get any reward, when the Ramban says yes it does. So that's the same machlokes if you can think it through. The Rambam says, how can you, since your gufs is going to get in the way of reward, so therefore you can't get, that can't be the Iker reward, therefore the Iker reward has to be in the Neshama only level. But the Rambam says, no, your guf also gets a reward, because your guf is just a marshal, if you understand. All the spiritual ideas are just reflected in your body. So again, you can just use your body to find God, or you can use your body to enjoy yourself, get lost in the marshal or find the nimshal. So our smartphones ossur, it really depends if you hold by tzimtzum kapshuto or tzimtzum lav kapshuto.